Okay, welcome to Tuesday night at the Mechanics Institute in San Francisco. We'll start our lecture tonight. One more game of Magnificent Magnus that we didn't get to from last week, and we have some Tuesday night action. There was particularly a game, Rafik Robel against Richard Newey, that Richard really wanted to see, and it was a very interesting and exciting game, so we'll look at that. And we'll also cover some things from the Reykjavik Open, which just ended yesterday. One of our club members, Ralph Palmieri, played in that tournament, getting 3.5 out of 9. Something, again, you might want to do if you want to go visit a place and you play a chess tournament there, you meet some of the locals, you've got some interaction with people who've lived there all the time. So, kind of a nice way to travel. But just for your warm-up, we'll go through Magnus's game, get you in shape for tonight's battle.
Is he white or black?
This, he was white against Alexander Grishuk, the last round game of the Gashimov Memorial in Azerbaijan. And Magnus was already a 1.5 points ahead of the tournament. So he could have just made a draw, but he was in beast mode, and he was
Rating points.
yeah. Well, sometimes you just want to play. You just, that's what you're there for. And so Magnus did have white. E4, his most aggressive move against Grishuk, and Grishuk replies with the classical double king pawn. So many people play the Gyoko piano, but Magnus went back to the classic Ruy Lopez, Fischer, Smyslov, Kasparov, everybody used to play automatically. And Grishuk played one of the moves that's causing that trouble, this Berlin defense, that if white castles, black grabs the e-pawn and gives it back and gets into that ending that Kramnik drew so many times against Kasparov or anybody else, and would beat even the players who would press too hard. But Magnus says, okay, we are just playing chess, and you may want to copy his openings. He just plays pawn to d3, guarding the e-pawn. And maybe it's not super aggressive with white, but you keep playing the entire position. So Grishuk develops, and Magnus just takes some squares, castles, pawn to d6, very normal play. Kind of an interesting move from Magnus, bishop to a4, won't get kicked, it can come back. And Grishuk maneuvers his knight over to the king side, something people do in the Gyoko piano also. Bishop c2, knight g6, and pawn to d4. So, okay, white's a little more aggressive in the center, but black's got his pieces well placed. And now a move that's probably preparation, pawn to a4. Well, now you're threatening to trap the bishop, which is easily dealt with, but you play on this side of the board, that side of the board, give him a lot to think about. So Grishuk gives his bishop an escape square, and here's kind of a curious decision from Magnus. He exchanges. For someone who's in beast mode in the old days, you'd say, giving up your central tension, your little bit of space advantage there. But Grishuk takes. Magnus trades the knights on e5, and then even trades the queens. A lot of players would say, well, they must be playing for a draw with the white pieces.
The beast is a flat worm.
What is that?
The beast is a flat worm.
A flatworm.
Yes. Or previously. Careful.
Bishop just takes the queen back. Pawn to a5. So this was his opening plan. Get a little space on the queen side. You know, it doesn't look so dangerous. And now develop. So at least none of these pieces are going to trade off. You can play a bit on the queen side, but nothing very aggressive so far. Bishop develops, and Magnus just develops his rook. He's not really afraid of this. Knight g4 because of rook e2 can defend it. But here, Grishuk goes into a think. That's one drawback in his play. He's a number 9 in the world, a tremendous player, but sometimes he just likes to think a lot and let his clock run down. Thinks a long time and he plays pawn to b5 to take some space. After the game, he didn't like this move. The computer doesn't mind it so much, maybe some other players, but it gives white something to work on.
Do you have a better move than he thought?
Could have gone, let's see, something, knight d4. Well, the knight, knight could take it. He could have repositioned his knight.
If he covers the diagonal to on the white squares, so that he can cover e2, the rook can't go there.
Okay.
But it would take 2 moves to do it.
There's a lot of slow plans here. Nothing too quick.
If he's on that diagonal, maybe.
I mean, if he were here and you could go knight to g4, if you could,
Yeah.
and you couldn't take the
Yeah.
bishop.
If he can get there.
Unfortunately, it's fairly universal.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to make it work. It's a plan, but I think Magnus would stop that.
Yeah. He is Magnus.
But anyway, he goes knight to b3. And here Grishuk didn't like his position so much anymore. The bishop could retreat, but the other bishop comes to e3, taking squares. And he takes the knight. So Magnus has 2 bishops, which is a little bit of an edge.
So I have a question, one move back. Could he play knight g4 now?
Right here,
No, before taking.
the knight would have taken the bishop on c5.
Oh, sorry.
But excellent question, because he does it right now.
Okay.
And I guess this was his plan to, hit that point. So it looks like you're being active, but the white squared bishop is very good guarding d1 especially, so the black's rook can't get in. And Magnus just defends the pawn. You don't want to give up the bishop and knight for rook and pawn. That would be terrible to have the 2 bishops against the rook. But here's Grishuk's plan, rook to d6. He figures he can double, he can cause trouble. If he doubles, he then will be threatening to do a checkmate.
We can play rook f6.
Rook f6 too.
Would it be good for him to kick the knight now?
It's
Kick the knight.
still h3.
I wonder if I could go knight takes pawn and double the rooks. It's
No,
knight
rook
takes
f6.
pawn and rook f6. Thank you. Excellent question. h3. Knight takes, rook takes, and wins that whole rook back.
Ah, okay.
Wow.
So you told us what Grishuk was thinking. Thank you, Guy. But Magnus really puts a damper on everything with his next move. Very nice move, and anyone want to guess? This is how you change a position with potential problems into one that's a pleasure to play.
There's bishop e3, but you're doubling the pawn. That's ugly.
Yes, that would be ugly. You've got some worries here with white. But Magnus doesn't worry. It's just not in his nature.
So bishop to g5.
Ah, well done. Way out here, kind of in the middle of nowhere. Stopping rook f6, stopping rook d8,
That's right.
allowing the other rook to get developed.
Yeah.
And h6, you could come around to here and kick the knight, and suddenly it's nice for white.
Bishop
Yeah.
e7.
Yes, bishop e7. Oh, thank you. That's a powerful threat right now. And Grishuk actually stops that with king to f8, but that wasn't his aggressive plan. So this next move is real Magnus too. Rook to f1. You might ask me why, but you'll see in just a second.
He's doubling up on the f7 pawn.
Okay.
Because he can open it up.
Very good. He's well. One is also now the bishop can retreat to c1, and this is super guarded if pawn to h6. But you're right. He actually has a plan on the f file. And well, the knight goes back. He's not afraid of a bishops of opposite color position. Yes. And you might not have guessed that move without Guy telling you the plan is to open the f file. And well, he solidifies there. Now f4 is going to be a problem. So, knight d7, and you can go pawn to f6 if f4. So again, a really nice move from Magnus. You go back. The bishop did its job. It got you a very aggressive position, stopped the build-up from black, but now it's back and you can advance. And Grishuk is in some trouble now. He commented after the game how impressed he was with Magnus's play, this maneuver here.
Well, he's just taking his time and crushing the guy. He's just gradually squeezing like a boa constrictor.
Thank you for the commentary. That's well expressed. So he continues, bishop to a7 retreating, pawn to f4, trying to open it up, and pawn to f6, keeping things closed. If you take on e5, the knight can capture, and black is very solid. So you know you're better with the bishops, but what to do? Most everybody in the world would have trouble with this position. And I won't ask you for Magnus's next move because you probably wouldn't get it. He plays pawn to h4. Now he's got everything where he wants it, so he just takes a little extra, some space on the king side.
He's trying to weaken that f pawn here.
Yes, that's true too. The rook came to e8 and pawn to h5 does threaten pawn to h6, kind of breaking the chain there. And yeah, this is a bit of trouble for black no matter what he does. This is the natural move which he played. The computer thought maybe something else, but it's just not easy.
Shouldn't you, as black, try to play c5 and block one of the bishop? That's great.
You sort of just played like a 2770 player. Grishuk played pawn to c5.
Oh yeah. But even earlier, I would have done it even before, and maybe I didn't say it before rook e8. But I don't know, because he wasted. I don't know if he wasted a move on rook e8.
Okay, maybe the bishop could have come to g5
Oh,
with tempo,
okay.
possibly.
Yeah.
It's
You
a
can
thought.
still- yeah.
We won't spend too much time on these
Yeah.
tactics because we have to get to the great game Royale Nui. But here looks good enough. It's actually you're planning to go C5. And not easy to find a plan for white. Even though it looks so aggressive, you're going to get shut down. Don't really want to take yet. But a great move now. It's an endgame, but Magnus develops his bishop, and this is a pawn sacrifice. Because bishop takes on f4, if the bishop takes knight e5, and Magnus takes back with the pawn, giving up the e pawn. And I mean, you can't do that because of bishop takes, and e5 is such a threat because of the discovered attacks. So you have to take this e pawn. Now what's good, if you look, this h pawn has these black kingside pawns immobile, so you don't notice so much that you're a pawn down. You've got some white squares here, but it's opening the position for the two bishops. Afterwards, they look and find some really exact moves with the computer looking 12 moves ahead. This is even better than what Magnus did. But Magnus attacked the rook first, and the rook retreated to e7, and then he doubled on the file, trying to get his pieces very active with bishop to g6, and probably some sacrifices opening the e file. Very tough to play the position with the black side. Afterwards, the computer finds the only move that would keep you in the game, which would be to go knight to b8, covering some squares. We won't really dwell on that. Bishop played f5 to get his knight a more active square, giving the pawn back. And Magnus takes it. Knight comes to f6, looks like a very good defensive square there. Now though, it's a classic position, two bishops against the knight and bishop. So Magnus plays king f3.
Why didn't he play bishop takes pawn?
Bishop takes pawn. That's now see, you don't take the bishop. You first throw in rook takes rook with check.
Okay.
And you have given us the answer to the next question, which is going to be, after Magnus's king f3, why he didn't take the pawn on h5. And Peter, you just gave us the answer because bishop takes pawn, it's no longer with check, and white would win material that way. And bishop adds to the tension. He's got all his pieces centralized. Knight to d5 on the bishop, hoping just to trade rooks and things. And in preparation for your game this evening, what was Magnus's winning move here?
He's black or white?
He is white. It's white to move. Complicated tactical position. Even Magnus probably spent 5 or 10 minutes on this move.
So you're going to give us 5 or 10 minutes?
No, maybe 30 seconds. 30 seconds. I think I'll save all your energy for your game. Pins, counter pins and such. He plays rook to d2. With this counter pin on this side, and it's hard for Grisham to get out of this. Plays rook to d8. Now you can't play here because of rook takes bishop check. But he goes bishop e4. And okay, you have to guard the knight, but then extra power on the d line.
What if he goes bishop move tonight? Black side then. Bishop and bishop.
If bishop takes the knight,
Oh, it goes black then.
well, our last move for white was rook to here.
Oh my God.
And yeah, you're trying to win a piece, and knight takes bishop on e3, rook takes rook. So Grisham had to retreat. Okay, sort of looks like it's defending everything, but in the end, you've got the centralized kings, the two bishops, and this big problem of the pawn on a6. Magnus just takes on d7, and there's no way out here. You can trade the rooks, and rook takes d7, rook takes, and you win this pawn, probably 2 pawns. Meanwhile, this one's pinned. So it's a completely hopeless situation. Grisham recaptured on d7 with the knight, but well, rook to d6, winning this pawn plus the pins and the 2 bishops.
Avoiding bishop e7, 95 check.
Oh, yes, if knight e5 check, pawn takes, guards the rook.
No, but if
And
but I'm
Elliot's saying if bishop b7,
a little too fast.
yes, just not careful enough because you lose your rook. We could actually play king e2, but the rook d6 just wraps it up. And Grisham had had enough, threw in the towel, and he almost applauded Magnus. He was such effusive praise after the game for this powerful performance. Yeah, Magnus is in terrific form these days.
Playing just like Magnus.
It's amazing how you can make the strongest players in the world look like idiots.
So now we get back to my favorite tournament, the Tuesday Night Marathon.
Oh, you'll be playing in the next one.
Well, I get to watch them, and I get to watch them online thanks to Juan Zendejas. You are live across the world with these boards.
That's right.
I look forward to dying at the chess.
And so we've got a highly entertaining game from Rafik Robial against Richard Newey. And this from round 4. So this starts out with a Reti opening. So one of the most classic of the unusual openings. You develop, use your C pawn to attack the center. Okay, Richard just holds the center, but now after g3 decides to take on c4, and after queen c2 doesn't bother to try to hold the pawn, which creates a lot of loose squares on the queen side. He just develops, and we get very classic kind of Catalan kind of position here. And now Rafik decides he's going to recapture with the knight rather than the queen. And there's no way to guard that pawn on c4. So the bishop's opened up. White's got what he's wanted, but black is also developing. So pretty classic play. Now rook b8, good move, kind of off of the long diagonal there. Castles, pawn to b6. Okay, that's a developing move. And
If he pushed the pawn all the way up, where would the white knight go?
yeah, well, you could find a very nice square on a5, and then looking to go into c6.
Very nice.
That would be a happy horse there.
That must be night, which doesn't look too bad.
So Richard just said, stay where you are, Mr. Knight. And Rafik develops the other knight. But then, Richard, there's the one move of the game that I don't quite like of yours. You go pawn to a6. It's Nimzovic, prophylactic, but to me it's a little slow. I always like developing, so I would have castled and looked for c5 instead. Still, it's just a small complaint. So pawn to d4, and bishop to b7, pawn to e4, and white has a little edge in this opening. Gotten a bit more control of the center. Nothing much, but some edge. So castles is a very good move. And rook d1, now a little hard to make the break, but a nice plan here. Queen to c8, getting out of the way, getting ready for a pawn break, and perhaps the rook to d8. And here, white could get some advantage with something like bishop to f4, just taking some squares, or even pawn to b3, kind of bishop might come to b2.
But on bishop at 4, you could play knight h5. That wouldn't be a problem.
You could, yeah, and we're at least developed here, and you probably want to move your knight back.
Yeah. Okay. So might as well go to 3.
That may not be a bad move by black. You know, just go back and say, well,
Yeah.
but then he probably developed the rook. But here, pawn to a3, and this doesn't quite work out that well. There's now c5 is a good break, and so here bishop to f4, and now starts the fun. What makes this a really interesting game? Rather than moving the rook, retreating, Richard goes pawn takes d4. Really a nice move. You don't want to take this rook on b8 because queen takes knight, has this pin knight, and you're on the bishop. So you would win material. Okay, there maybe something else good, but that one's certainly good for black. So Rafik just takes the pawn back on d4.
I was just gonna say that I didn't really analyze it completely, but you have to take the knight, queen takes knight if you go bishop takes rook. Otherwise, if you go d takes c3, then bishop comes back to d6.
To d6. I think maybe you're right. Elliot may see something else, but queen takes knight is certainly queen takes knight is certainly winning for you if he taken the rook on b8. So rook takes d4 is forced for him, and you could have played queen c5 in this position. According to our Mr. Computer, it's interesting, a sharp move. Something like queen to d2, pawn to e5, forking.
What's wrong with bishop to c5?
We are going to go back there because that's what Richard played.
What about E5 directly? Well, the queen's on C8.
E5 directly in this position.
Queen's on C8, it's just hanging.
Knight takes pawn. There's there's two on the E5 pawn, and only one defender.
Oh.
But okay, Richard played bishop c5. That's a more interesting one. And knight d6.
Wow.
All kinds of problem there, and bishop takes. You have bishop takes d6 with lots of black squared play for the white side.
Very complicated.
Well, Richard was very inspired this game. He sacrifices the queen.
Oh, nice.
What?
That's amazing.
Knight takes, rook takes. And here you have a position, a rook and a bishop for the queen. But black has some squares. You know, this bishop is good. You have these files.
Wow.
And it's hard for the queen to find a target to hit something.
That's
The queen is great when it's an open board. It can run around trying to get something on one side and the other. But when the position's a bit solid and closed, then the queen isn't as strong. So the computer does like the white side. That's true by somewhat, but it's not easy to play the white side. How do you open up the position to make use of the queen? Anyway, the play's pretty good from here on. It's knight 6, rook takes, bishop to d6, rook to e8, queen d3, pawn e5, so you have that bishop on d4. And maybe he should consider trying to get rid of the bishop immediately, but knight to c5 attacks, you would have to trade the bishop for the knight.
There's a pawn hanging on b2.
Oh, I would think not.
No.
I think if bishop takes b2, you could probably attack it. And yes, nowhere for the bishop to go except back where you take it and open up the position, plus winning your pawn back.
Yeah.
Maybe. It's things open up. The computer was happy with white's position here. And that's what you don't want, a nice open position for the queen.
What program are you using for analysis?
Generally the Stockfish one. They will give you the same result for looking 5 or 6 moves ahead. You could go knight to c5 though, but knight e2 is probably the most testing move in the position. a4 is the second choice of the computer, just holding the squares. Richard doubles, rook c6 on the bishop, bishop retreats, double on the file, and knight e2 here now, with the bishop guarding the pawn. But it's not quite as good in this position because Richard hits back with knight c5, and there's too many here. You've got to take the knight. So Rafik does. He takes, and the bishop takes, so the white knight doesn't get it. And here's thoroughly equal position even according to the computer because of these squares and the developed black pieces. So rook d1, looking for some mating ideas. But g6 is a good response.
What's wrong with rotating the queen?
On d6 maybe? That's what it means? Trade that.
Yes, maybe I retreat if the rook attacks the queen. I would actually be very happy to trade rooks with the white side. If I could trade pieces, then I get more and more space for the queen to maneuver.
Actually, you'd have the queen takes rook.
Queen takes rook.
Here, queen takes, yeah, you could that.
Oh,
Because there's no check.
And b6 goes.
Rook.
Guard
That's-
b2.
Okay, that looks like you might win a pawn if rook d6, queen takes rook. Looks like white could be a pawn ahead. Another reason Richard didn't play that move. On rook d1, he did g6, knight to c3, and bishop d4. And it looked like, what do you do to get the white position active? Okay, bishop h3. Kind of causes a bit of trouble, but rook d8, now you're threatening bishop takes, pawn check. And obviously queen f3. Well, you're probably worried a bit about the white position. The computer thinks it's okay, it's sort of solid. Now Richard doubles on the D line. Power on the D line, this bishop, this knight, this bishop. And even if Alpha Zero thinks that white is equal, it's a tough time for the white side. So many things to worry about, so many threats. And Rafik played king to h1 here, which I can ask you, what should you do? And everyone except Richard is allowed to give us a response.
Bishop c3. Bishop takes c3. No.
What do you think? Bishop takes c3? Yeah, that's it. That's suddenly bishop on b7, knight on e4. There's
You trade the rook first.
that's kind of yeah. Now it's terrible. King h1. He cracked under the pressure. And now we have to ask you about this, and I think I asked you in the email. In the game score, which could have been done by Mr. Winslow, it goes queen takes c3. Now, did this happen in the game? I'm just wondering because most people would worry about rook takes rook check.
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah.
Okay, it doesn't matter. It's just, I would sort of automatically go, instead of queen takes c3, I would go rook takes rook first, which I thought might have been your move order.
No.
Okay,
But it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, I don't think.
no, it doesn't,
White still got problems.
Because you take e4, that's why? You take on e4 eventually?
yes, and in any case, the tactics are not going to work. I would have thrown this in, but it happens next move.
Yeah, they close it down a little bit.
Queen takes, and then taking with the knight.
Oh.
Is
Oh
really
my God.
brutal.
Yeah.
Whereupon now Rafik did rook takes d6.
Oh wow.
And with all those discoveries and things, you calmly took back, and we have this position. Which this is a pleasure to see.
Since the knight moves, check.
Check, but
Yes, this is going to be a discovered check. It's not just that it's attacking the queen. There's going to be a terrible discovered check. Well, there is no good response. We'll see what he did. He decided, why not take the pawn at least? We've got some threats, some checks, some things.
Knight
Sorry, what move? We were nodding.
Knight takes G3 check, discover.
Double discovered check. Excellent.
Then rook mate.
And then, well, he in fact resigned. The rook would have gone check, and the only legal move, and the rook mate.
Double check the queen.
So,
You have to throw the queen in first, huh?
if you wanted to delay the move by being a queen down. But wonderful game, Richard. Well, I was going to show you another TNN game, but there was the tournament that just ended in Reykjavik. As I told you, our club member, Ralph Palmieri, got 3.5 out of 9, and Christopher Yu, a young Bay Area player, got 5.5 out of 9. Pretty good performance. The tournament was won by, if I can get this right, it's
What was the average strength?
well, it was an open tournament. So you had people who were actually rated some 11 or 1200, some young Icelandic juniors, and then you had these 2700 grandmasters, such as Gawain Jones from England, who he was in the 8-way tie for first, along with Tigran Petrosian, the other Tigran Petrosian, the one who's still alive, and Neil Grandelius from Sweden, who's almost 2700 player, whose handle is Grandelicious. Pardon?
Over 2,500?
Oh, many players over 2,500, over 2,600. And this super young Iranian talent, Alireza Firazu. Did I pronounce that right,
I think he's the Iranian champion. He just won the championship earlier.
Yes, only 15 years old, almost 2,700. He's the European Rapid champion.
Wow.
And he was leading this tournament for the later rounds. He had a great game with the person who won on tiebreak, Constantin Lupulescu from Romania. So I think that'll probably be the only thing we have time for, but this was a very entertaining game. Yeah. So, brilliant young teenage 15-year-old Firuza with the white pieces, and Lupulescu with the black pieces, and this was played in, I think it was the 8th round. Round 7. The Gamma tournament in Reykjavik that just ended yesterday.
What were their ratings?
He did toss for 66 in first. I don't know what the bullet said.
You have to ask Richard about that.
But these are squishies.
Oh.
So he wrote.
Okay, you did play, or he did play rook takes d6 in your game, one move before the official game score that I showed.
What are their ratings?
Okay, they're both high 2,600 players, something like 2670 or 2660. So, Firuza starts with e4, aggressive young player, and we get a French defense. Okay, very solid opening, and we get the classical variation, but Firuza just plays the Steinitz defense and advances his center pawns without the bishop to g5, something I've also tried a lot. Lupulescu does the classic counter on the queen side was c5, and both sides develop. Queen to d2 and castles. Now, white doesn't want to castle queenside immediately because pawn to c4 followed by a6, b5, or rook b8, b5, you get a pawn storm on the queen side. That's very dangerous, and the white attack isn't quite as fast. So the usual response is take the pawn on c5, and then you can castle queenside with the center a little bit open. And most of the time, black is recaptured on c5. But Lupulescu uses a new move, not so often seen, queen to a5. And kind of a dangerous new idea. Anand did a3, which is safe, and then you can take and threaten to trade. That leads to equality. But young Firouzja played the most aggressive move, which is a bit dangerous, castling queenside. And it looks very safe, but Lupulescu played this idea pawn to b6, offering a pawn sacrifice just to open lines on the queen side and get at the white king. But it looks like white has a good response, which Firouzja does. Just develop, hit this knight that's kind of causing trouble, and not worry about taking the pawn yet. There's these ideas if the knight moves here, there, pawn takes, you have this trick of bishop takes the knight that defends the queen, and knight takes d5, so after queen takes, you throw in a check, and you're just winning the game. But, okay, these players are well prepared. Lupulescu had a very different idea. Perhaps Firouzja hadn't seen it. After bishop to b5, he goes knight to b4. Okay, attacking the pawn on a2 with the queen and knight. And Firouzja just attacks that knight who was trying to take his pawn. Looks like black is in real trouble here. But here's Lupulescu's idea. He just takes back on c5. Now material is even, except of course the black knight is hanging on b4. Okay, this knight is guarding the bishop, and if you take the knight, the pawn will be attacking the knight. So he takes the knight on d7 first, and takes the knight on b4. So black has sacrificed a knight. Lupulescu takes back on b4, and you know what? If the knight goes to e2, there's a queen a1 mate, so you have to go back to b1. And okay, you've got a whole knight for a pawn. This knight here is just sitting here, and after Lupulescu's move, all the black pieces are active. They're really doing something. And you look at this white king and say, well, that's clearly a target. The black pieces are coming here. How am I going to get play against the king over there? That's kind of slow. That's often what makes a really good attack. Your own king is safe, so you can marshal all your forces on the opposing king. And I think that's what makes this sacrifice worthy for black. So Firouzja brings his knight to the center. Very logical. And
What about bishop a4?
bishop a4. Now for black.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so direct. You know, that's I don't know. It's maybe you're threatening that. It's true. I could maybe do.
Square bishop, I'll take the knight.
Okay. It's a thought. Now I could go pawn to b3. I think things are guarded. Bishop here, maybe I take your bishop. I kind of like to get my king here, and I'd feel safer.
Well, I'm just trying to weaken the pawn structure.
I think you may have strengthened it, though.
Really?
It depends on the tactics. I mean, it's a logical attacking move, but in this position, I think it probably helps white more than it hurts him to play pawn to b3.
Okay.
Well, if I have your approval, I'll.
It was a snap thought, you know, I didn't look at it for the deal.
Okay. Well, he played queen to a2. He's first getting pieces near surrounding the king, and
Still have to get rid of that knight. It's in the middle of the board.
well, we will see that story in a second. First, he charges ahead on this side, trying to get some counterplay. It's hard to move these pieces, so he thinks, well, I have an extra piece. Let's attack over there. He took the pawn and rook over, trying to make play on this side of the board. He'd love it to open up there. This next move is a great attacking move, one you appreciate. White's trying to make play here. You could guard the pawn or something. I love this move, pawn to a5. It's so slow. They're just fun little pawn, but bringing your pawns down here, saying it's going to take a while over here. And we'll see how the game continued. It was knight takes, and suddenly white has a lot of threats here. But Lupuescu just gets rid of the powerful knight. And then this next move, which I also like a lot, pawn to a4.
Wow.
And this position is sort of a pleasure to look at. Okay, yeah, you can do queen takes pawn, you have an extra piece. You sort of opened up a little bit there, but things don't work very well for
You show white, you want to show white queen takes pawn loses?
Okay, anyone want to give us the move here? Thank you. Rook takes pawn check. King takes. Rook check. If knight to c3, the rook takes it. If king to d2, your queen is hanging on d5. You check. With bishop c5, we can go check, win the queen, and there's no back rank mate because the bishop can retreat to f8. So these powerful threats that black has, and it's hard for white to move. He chose bishop d4, trying to get some defense over there. And Lupuescu continued pawn to a3. Yes, if pawn to b3, you can just take it. And then threatening to go pawn to a2.
Why not queen b2?
Well, there's a bishop
Oh,
on,
I'm sorry.
on d4. So he left the pawn on b2 where the bishop can recapture. But you don't feel good about leaving a pawn on a3 with all those threats. I like this move, pawn to e6, trying to open things up. If pawn takes e6, rook g5, you're getting play on this side of the board. He just did pawn f6. Keep your own king safe, and he believes in his powerful attack on this side of the board. So it went queen to d3. Another move I really like in the attack. One more pawn move.
Wow.
These pawns that started here come all the way up to this side of the board. If I were the white side, I'd be feeling, oh, I really don't like this.
You have to think a lot about a position like that though before you put your queen way over in a far end of the world. I mean, clearly black is superior here, but just in general, your queen's so far away from your own king that.
Oh, I think you do. You're way stuck over here.
Yeah.
If he could get you on this side, you couldn't do anything with
Yeah.
the queen over here. But he's been very careful, and you look, it's very solid over here.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, these two little ones there just causing a world of trouble. So how do you defend that? You can't go that because nobody's defending b2. He did rook to f2. And
Is rook e2 bad?
rook d2
Rook to e2 instead of them bringing that rook back, moving the other rook up.
to d2
That's what I
here.
meant, sorry. I mean, you can't go away because your knight hanging, but at least it's a runaway square right now. He doesn't have any hours.
Queen takes knight, and then advance the other pawn.
Well, okay, we don't,
Yeah.
the king will get in the way and
Yeah.
stop it, the pawn to a2 check.
What about pawn takes? Pawn takes followed by bishop a3.
Actually, pawn takes check. King moves, queen takes knight.
Sorry, what was the
But then
suggestion?
we play, we can take the pawn, right? So
Take,
play VA check. Well, the bishop can take that. Let's see. Okay.
yeah, this isn't,
It's not over here, but it's close.
he may have to play as he did in the game.
Well, it doesn't, this is really weird. This is queen a1.
Queen a1, he may be able to take on a3 with the bishop.
True.
So he probably will do what he did in the game.
Bishop takes a3
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can't take it, yeah.
Elliot is giving
Right,
us bishop takes a3 check,
Right.
and that wins the game.
Go king e2, not that that was exactly.
Okay, yeah, you can lose the knight with check and play on a bit, and maybe the pawn.
So with the other rook back, he doesn't have to even have a.
So, as we're running a little short of time, I'm going to go directly to his defense, which also looks logical. Now, this might help here somewhat. The problem is, okay, rook a4, maybe you can double. It's hard to do anything with white, even though you're a piece up. No knight takes, and something takes a checkmate. So, but now he played pawn to c3, so the rook is guarding the b2 pawn. And here came another very nice move. I'm going to test you a bit later, but he did rook takes d4, getting rid of that defender, and you have to take it with the queen, but bishop c5 caused a lot of trouble. The queen had to retreat, and right now he could have actually taken on b2 and then taken on f2 should give him a winning position. He failed to do this and could give Firouzja a chance. He took immediately on f2, and queen takes. And now this attacking move, queen to a1, threatening pawn to a2. And there's a computer chance to escape with rook takes d5 and queen f5 that perhaps white could have held on. So this was some opportunity that he gave him. He should have done the pawn takes b2, bishop takes f2. But this position that we get to is very interesting. He played pawn to e7 and now pawn to a2 on the knight. And okay, white's got this pawn close to queening. Of course, he's got a big problem here, but d pawn's loose, you can check. And the question is, why not queen to f5 here, threatening the rook, which has to stop the pawn from queening with mate, the pawn check, you guard the knight. And this is your problem before the, no, Mr. Wolf, we must get these other people in shape first. How does black win this position? Yes? Rook takes pawn check, but I can just take it with my pawn. What's that? B2, and I will run with my king. I'm going to queen with checkmate.
Maybe queen takes c3 instead of b2.
Okay, you don't mean queen takes c3 yet because the knight will take it.
So
You take the knight, the queen takes, and even with all this, black will get a check. Very good. And Firuza, at the last minute, that was his plan, to play queen to f5, and he saw that, but then saw this very tricky rook sacrifice along with everything else. So he queened the pawn first to get the rook off of that pile, queen to f5, and now came the winning move on which he resigned. Anybody for black's next move? To win the Reykjavik Open.
Rook e4.
What's that?
Rook e4.
Rook e4.
Queen takes pawn check.
Yeah, check would be some trouble there.
Then rook e2.
Rook e2, again, queen takes pawn check is going to be, because I get my rook in the game too.
Takes the knight as a queen.
Take the knight and the queen would take you back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's a good plan.
Probably a winning end game.
Okay,
But you
But-
could take it to
we want to make the opponent resign.
Okay, g6.
Pardon? G6. I will take the pawn with check. That's
Okay, rook e5.
G6 is a good. Rook e5. I get some checks in. Rook e5 might work. That's okay. Well, I'll show you as it's time to play. Your suggestions are good, but let's put somebody else to work also. And with that move threatening to take, Firuza resigned. You can look at your options, but they're very unpleasant. For instance, well, if rook takes, well, you take with the queen, and you're going to have a pawn takes, queen takes, rook check. If pawn takes, now the move you suggested before, pawn to g6. The queen's got to guard this, guard the check on c8. Might have one check, but that's it. So he resigned after pawn to d4. Okay, thank you. Good luck tonight.